Hey everyone, I'm Russ Frushtick, and I'm here with a very special guest, the Xbox One controller. Oh yes, finally it is here. We thought we'd run it through its paces, but first, maybe we should compare it to some old controllers, maybe even a current competitive controller on a next-gen console. Is this the future? I think it is. Maybe. So the Xbox 360 controller, generally considered one of the best controllers ever made. A lot of people really like the placement of the analog sticks, the triggers felt great, the bumper's really good face buttons, but it wasn't perfect. A lot of people took issue with the D-pad. Actually, it was kind of universally hated, not super accurate, mushy, gross. Now, a lot of that has been changed on the Xbox One controller. First of all, the D-pad. Ah, yes. The D-pad has been fixed. It is not awful anymore, I am pleased to report. It's very clicky. You can notice, you can even hear it, how clicky it is. And it's not a circle anymore. It's this cross configuration that pretty much anyone who's played a classic video game will recognize. And you know, for fighting games, for old school platforming games, it feels great. Very accurate, easy to know when you're pushing buttons or not. It's a big, big improvement. So the analog stick placement is pretty much the same as it was on Xbox 360, but the sticks themselves feel very different. They're a lot smaller on top and more concave. Your fingers actually really rest a lot deeper inside the analog sticks themselves. And me personally, I find that gives you a lot more accuracy. I feel like I have a lot more range of motion with these sticks, and definitely an improvement. I didn't think the analog sticks on the 360 controller were that bad, but I really like these a lot more. So another big change are the triggers and the bumpers. You can actually see they're a lot wider than they used to be. They actually curve and fit your finger as it rests around the top of the controller. Triggers feel really good. They've actually added a bunch of rumble inside the triggers themselves. We haven't noticed a ton of difference with the rumble so far in games, but we might see that later on with more development. That being said, the bumpers have also been changed, and I don't think for the better. The bumper spacing between the triggers themselves and the bumpers, it's a pretty wide jump that you have to make with your fingers. If you're playing a first-person shooter and you want to get off, say, a grenade in Call of Duty, you have to make a pretty big leap. And even stranger, the bumpers can't really be clicked on top. If you're trying to click them here, right where they meet the top of the controller, it doesn't really work. That's like where the hinge is. You actually have to click them on the sides over here. And that's a weird move to make. If your fingers are resting right here and then you have to go over here, it's very awkward. I don't like it. I really miss the old Xbox 360 bumpers. I don't know why they made this change. Whoops. Another change they've made, the face buttons are kind of flatter and rounder and a bit closer together. I actually like the placement of the face buttons now. It really helps, you know, if you're trying to pull off multiple button presses at once, much easier than it used to be. They also feel a bit clickier than they used to be, which makes it pretty easy to tell when you're pressing and not. The start and back buttons have returned, but they're called something completely different on the Xbox One controller. They are called menu, these lines, apparently that means menu, and view, these two cubes mean view. Confusing, especially if you're playing a game and it says, begin the game by pressing menu, so that'll take some getting used to. But they're pretty much in the same place, and they feel basically the same as they used to on the Xbox One, shaped a little bit differently, but still pretty much the same. So it shouldn't make that much of a difference. It's really just a labeling concern. So they've moved the guide button to the top of the controller. It's actually not called the guide anymore, but we'll still call it that for kicks. They removed the light ring that used to be around it to tell you which player you were, but that's all supposed to be on the screen while you're playing, so that shouldn't be an issue. It works functionally the same way as it used to. It'll take you back to the main menu of the Xbox One. Also back is the sync button, which will let you sync controllers directly to the Xbox One. Piece of cake, you just hold it down, and you will sync right to the nearest console. So newly added is a micro USB port. You can actually plug in a standard micro USB cable directly into the Xbox, and it will charge. You don't have to worry about having like a special kit or anything like that. You do, however, have to have a rechargeable battery in the device. Pretty logical. If you have no batteries at all, you can actually plug this directly into the Xbox One, and it'll act like a wired controller. Piece of cake. Very helpful. So on the bottom of the controller, we've got the accessories port. This is actually where you're going to plug in the headset that comes with the Xbox One. They've also reworked the battery pack. You can see the battery pack sticking out. That used to be a problem on the Xbox 360. No longer an issue. It's completely flush. It doesn't affect your hands when you're holding it like this. So it's easy to pop off. Snaps off like that. Snaps back like that. You can drop rechargeable batteries in there. You can drop AA's in there. super easy. So one last thing I wanted to mention is just the sides of the controller. It feels a lot better than it did on the Xbox 360. It feels my hand a lot more. It feels like my hand is more in control of the bottom of the controller. It's not a huge improvement, but I definitely like the look and feel of it more than on the Xbox 360. So I really feel like the Xbox One controller is better than the Xbox 360 controller. The question is, how does it fare against the next generation rival, the PS4's Dualshock 4? A lot of differences here. First off, the analog sticks obviously are lined up, they're not offset. They're also larger on top. It feels like they have a little less range of motion, but they rest really comfortably in my hands. I like them. I might prefer the offset analog sticks on the Xbox One a little bit more. I think they might offer a little more accuracy for first-person shooters, but overall they feel really good. So for the D-pad on the PS4 controller is closer to what it was on the PS3 controller. Feels pretty much the same. I like it a lot. It was good on the PS3 controller. No one had really any issues with it then. And it feels a little smoother and easier to use now. So really no complaints here. How does it fare against the Xbox One controller? It's a good question. I think I actually prefer the PS4 controller more for the D-pad. It might be the placement. It is more natural based on the build and the lack of offset analog sticks. But yeah, I think I just like the PS4 D-pad a little bit better. As for the face buttons, they're pretty much the same. The Xbox One and the PS4 face buttons feel the same. On the PS4, they're spaced a little farther apart. Thankfully, the PS4 got rid of those pressure-sensitive buttons that were on the PS3 that everyone hated. So now they're just very clicky and easy to use, very noticeable. The other big difference, triggers. Now the triggers on the PS4 controller feel and look very different than they do on the Xbox One controller. These aren't as curved in as they are on the Xbox One controller, but they also feel like you have a lot more control over the pull of the triggers. It feels like it's a lot more of an analog pull, whereas on the Xbox One, you don't feel like you have that pressure that's really pushing back on you. Again, it's a preference thing. I think I prefer the triggers on the PS4 controller a little bit more. The bumpers, as I said, I had some issues with the bumpers on the Xbox One controller. The bumpers on the PS4 feel great, super easy to use, really easy when you're using the triggers and bumpers together. You're really just jumping from one to the other. It's a piece of cake. Love them. So, gut reaction, I think it's pretty clear that the Xbox One controller is an improvement over the Xbox 360 controller. When it comes to the PS4 controller, it's definitely a lot closer. I think first-person shooter fans are going to dig the offset analog sticks, and it feels like there's a little more accuracy on the Xbox One controller. As for the PS4 controller, it feels like an overall really good controller. I think it'll work with a lot of different games, but it's definitely a tight race. Both companies have made really good controllers, and that's great news for us. Make sure you keep it here on Polygon.com for all the next generation coverage. And remember, I care deeply about all of you.